I was holding a warm casserole dish against my chest when I noticed the file drawer. It was hanging open about 3 inches, just enough that you couldn't ignore it without making a decision. My sister Vera's office was otherwise immaculate. The desk was cleared. The bookshelves were alphabetized. Even the trash can had been emptied, which felt like a strange thing to notice on the day we had buried our father. I only meant to close the drawer with my hip and keep moving, but when I nudged it, a manila folder slipped forward from the top of the stack and dropped flat at my feet. I set the casserole on the edge of the desk and bent down to pick it up. I looked at the tab. 5 words, written in Vera's narrow, careful handwriting. 5 words that stopped everything in my body cold. Paula, keep her at 0. My father had been in the ground for 3 hours. My eyes were still dry and tight from crying at the graveside, and the mascara I had put on that morning because it felt disrespectful not to try was smudged into the corner of my left eye. I had driven 40 minutes to this house to drop off food and check on our mother and maybe feel less alone for a few hours. Instead, I was standing in my sister's home office, staring at a folder with my name on it. I had come back from the will reading that morning with my father's watch, a cedar toolbox from the garage, and a handwritten note I hadn't yet understood. Vera had received the house, the investment account, the jewelry, and formal authority over our mother's care going forward. Every person in that room had been careful not to look at me when the reading finished. Now I understood why. The folder explained everything. My name is Paula Whitmore. I was 62 years old the morning I understood that my sister had not simply done better than me in a legal process I didn't know was happening. She had spent months working to make sure I ended up with nothing, not as a side effect of wanting more for herself. As a goal she had planned for and organized and pursued deliberately. I am not the kind of woman who announces herself. I grew up in a town where people measured each other by whether they showed up when things got hard, and I had spent my whole life showing up. My husband Wayne and I built something modest and honest together. A ranch house we were nearly done paying off. Part-time bookkeeping work at a feed supply company that suited me, and a life that was simple in the good way. Wayne died 5 years ago, a fast illness that didn't give us enough time, but gave us just enough to say what mattered. After that, I kept going the way you do. When my father's health began to slip, I was the daughter who drove him to his appointments. I sorted the insurance paperwork they found overwhelming. I refilled prescriptions and tracked lab results and learned to read the language of medical billing so I could dispute the charges my parents didn't actually owe. I managed the small emergencies without making them into events. The plumbing call, the tax notice, the furnace that quit on a January night while my parents were inside. Vera lived 2 hours away and had what she called a demanding schedule. She had a polished house, a firm manner, and the kind of authority that comes from always sounding more certain than the room. She also, I was beginning to understand while standing in her doorway, had a filing system. In my family, showing up had made me dependable. What I had not understood was that it had not made me safe. The will reading happened the morning after the funeral, in a small conference room at the offices of Arthur Pennell, the estate attorney my parents had worked with for nearly 30 years. Someone had left a cardboard tray of coffee on the side table. No one touched it. My mother sat between Vera and me, wearing the expression of a woman who has spent all her emotional reserves and cannot yet find where she put the rest. Vera sat with her hands folded. I sat with mine in my lap. Arthur read the document with the measured pace of someone who understood that speed does not help in rooms like this one. Vera received the house. She received the primary investment account. She received the jewelry collection our mother had assembled piece by piece over 5 decades. And she received what the document called residual family authority over the ongoing management of our mother's care and household decisions. When Arthur read that last phrase, something in Vera's posture settled. A small change, like something she had been holding had just been safely set down. I received my father's watch. A plain steel thing he had worn every day of his adult life without sentimental ceremony. I received the cedar toolbox from the garage, which smelled of machine oil and sawdust in the way that his things always did. and I received a handwritten note, folded once, and tucked into the envelope alongside the will packet. The note said, "You know where to look if things feel wrong." My father was not a man who made vague statements. He said what he meant in the fewest words that would carry it. I had read the note in the parking lot afterward and told myself grief was making it seem weightier than it was. That was before I found the folder. The entire reading had taken 9 minutes. I went back to the office. Not immediately. I rejoined the gathering first. Accepted the hugs, kept the casserole dish moving, listened to people tell true and slightly polished stories about my father. I stayed close to my mother so she knew without looking where I was. But the folder had been in my mind from the moment I closed that drawer. I had 11 words, and Vera's handwriting taking up space in my chest. And I knew from the moment I walked out of the office, the first time, that I was going to return to it. I waited until Vera was in the kitchen with a group of women, then walked back down the hall and opened the office door. I pulled the folder and sat in the desk chair and opened it properly this time. What was inside was not a single document. It was a system, organized the way Vera organized everything, by category and date, with visible structure and clear purpose. There were printed emails, paper clipped in sequence, sticky notes with phrases written in shorthand, copies of pages from what appeared to be a formal, professional assessment, and a yellow legal pad with Vera's writing laid out in careful columns. One column listed observations about me: emotionally stable but isolated, resistant to institutional guidance, functions best when not over-informed. Another column held strategy notes: frame gifts as prior support. Mother responds to fear language. Narrative stabilized if care consultant aligned before the estate process begins. At the bottom of the page, underlined twice, with the deliberate pressure of someone making sure: inheritance neutralized if narrative held. Narrative neutralized. I sat with the papers shaking in my hands, and I did not make a sound. This was not grief. This was not paranoia. This was a document in my sister's handwriting in a folder with my name on it, and it told me that what had happened that morning at Arthur's office had been built months in advance. The emails were harder to read than the notes. Notes are private thinking, the internal language of planning, still belonging to one person, still contained. If someone found them, they could be explained as anxiety on paper, rough drafts of ideas that never went anywhere. Emails are communications. They go somewhere and arrive somewhere and exist on servers that belong to other people. They are evidence of contact between two parties. And the party on the other end of these emails was a professional elder care consulting firm in the city. In those emails, stretched over nearly 8 months, Vera described me in the cool and measured language of professional observation. She wrote that I was resentful of family obligation. She described me as financially inconsistent, a phrase I recognized immediately as chosen for its useful vagueness, the kind that sounds specific while meaning almost anything. She wrote that I had been less engaged in caregiving than I claimed. That last phrase is the one I kept returning to. My whole adult life I had done the repetitive, invisible work of being present without recording or announcing it. I had not kept logs of my visits. I had not photographed the prescription runs, or the appointments, or the January night I managed the furnace repair while my parents were in the cold. I had not kept score, because keeping score had felt like caring less, not more. Vera had found the gap in that approach and walked through it with professional documentation. She had been converting my silence into a paper absence for 8 months, filing it with an outside organization whose job was to believe and record what it was told. I closed the folder, replaced every paper in order, slid the folder back to the exact position I had found it, closed the drawer. Then I picked up the casserole dish and walked back into the gathering. I said goodbye to 2 neighbors and hugged my mother longer than I usually do. I thanked Vera for hosting. She thanked me for coming. We both meant the words less than they sounded. I drove home with both hands on the wheel and a very quiet face. I did not turn on the radio. I did not call anyone. I drove in silence and let the road do its work on the part of me that needed something simple and forward-moving to hold on to. There is a skill I had been building without naming it for many years. The ability to carry something significant without letting it change your posture, your voice, the small surface decisions of your hands. Some people are born knowing how to do it. I had learned it through being the one who handled hard things quietly, and through 5 years of doing grief in a way that required daily practice in rooms where other people were watching. I needed that skill now more than I had ever needed it before. Because my first job was not to confront Vera. Confrontation was satisfying in the imagination, but wrong in practice. It closed the distance too fast and gave the other person time to prepare, to explain, to adjust the story before you had gathered what you needed. My first job was to let her keep believing she was ahead of me. Every day she spent believing that was a day I could use. That night I read my father's note again at the kitchen table with a cup of tea going cold beside me. You know where to look if things feel wrong. The cedar toolbox was sitting on the floor where I had left it when I came home. I had not opened it yet. I had been treating it the way you treat some things on hard days, as something that could wait until you were ready for it. I brought it to the table. I was ready now. My father was not a sentimental man. He expressed affection through what he did rather than what he said, through the Sunday evening ledger he never missed, the neighbors, the cars he fixed without mentioning it, the way he taught me to read a set of accounts when I was 12 and told me the truth about any situation almost always lives in the numbers if you are patient enough to look. He had written 7 words on a folded piece of paper and placed them precisely into the will envelope. Nothing to soften them, nothing to explain them. Just those words, in the spare and certain handwriting of a man who chose everything he put on paper deliberately. I opened the toolbox the way he had taught me to open things, with attention, not impatience. He had said once that the way a person opens something tells you almost as much about them as what they do with what they find inside. The tools inside were arranged exactly as I expected, by size and function, everything in its slot. He had always kept his tools this way. Order was a form of respect to him, a way of honoring objects that did honest work. I lifted the main tray. The deep compartment below it held the specialty items, the bits and smaller pieces that didn't belong in the organized tray above. The bottom of that compartment was not solid all the way through. I ran my finger along the edge and found the seam. It was tight and clean, the work of someone who had taken their time. I pressed the corner gently and the false panel lifted away beneath my hand. Under it, wrapped in wax paper and sealed with tape, was a packet. A date was written on the corner in my father's handwriting. 2 years earlier. He had been planning this for at least 2 years. I sat at the kitchen table for a long time before opening the packet. The house had gone completely quiet. The clock on the microwave said 20 past 11. I was thinking about the fact that my father had cut a false bottom in a toolbox, had taken the time to do it carefully, cleanly, in a way that wouldn't be discovered by accident. That he had wrapped whatever was inside in wax paper, that he had dated it and sealed it, and then left the toolbox to me specifically, and written a note that would bring me back to it when the moment came. He had done all of this quietly, in advance, without telling me. That kind of preparation does not happen in a single afternoon. It requires intention sustained over time, care about an outcome that is not yet certain, and trust that the person it is meant for will be in a position to use it. Which meant he had seen the shape of what might happen. He had decided the safest way to protect me was not through confrontation or direct amendment or open declaration, but through a structure he built quietly and entrusted to objects and trusted people before anyone could interfere with it. I opened the packet. Photocopies of bank transfer records, repair invoices, the furnace job, the roof deposit, the property tax payments from the difficult year after his surgery. Prescription receipts. Records from the medical transport service I had arranged when my parents could no longer drive safely. Smaller amounts in between that had blurred into the background of a long caregiving relationship until now. And a notarized memorandum from an attorney named Colin Mercer. The memo stated that my financial contributions toward my parents' home and medical expenses had been formally documented, and that they were attached to a supplemental estate instruction designed to ensure what the document called equitable offset at distribution. My father had known the math might come out wrong. He had built something specifically to correct it. I cleared my dining room table the next morning. I moved everything else off it and spread the full contents of the wax paper packet flat, then added everything I could locate from my own records, files on my laptop, the paper folders in the cabinet by the back door, email threads I had kept with contractors and billing offices over the years, organized by date, the way a bookkeeper keeps everything. I had not preserved these records as evidence. I had preserved them because tracking what money does is simply how my mind works, and because my father taught me that the truth about a situation lives in the numbers, if you are willing to sit with them long enough. The financial timeline began with the property tax payment. My father's surgery had left a gap in his accounts during his recovery, and the county notice had arrived while he was still in the hospital. I had paid it from my savings on a Tuesday afternoon without telling him until he was well enough to hear it without worrying. Then the furnace. January. Vera was in Arizona for 2 weeks. I called 3 companies, chose the best estimate, paid the deposit, and managed the installation across 2 days, while coordinating around the repair crew's schedule. Then the prescriptions, 18 months of monthly payments for two medications the insurance plan didn't cover adequately. Then the roof deposit, the medical transport fees, the smaller amounts that had been so routine I had barely registered making them at the time. I added it all up. The total was large enough that I sat back and looked at the wall for a moment before I wrote it down. Vera had not just cut me out of the estate she received. She had erased years of my own financial contribution to the property she was now inheriting. I called Colin Mercer the next morning. His name was on the notarized memorandum. A brief search confirmed he had practiced estate law in the county for nearly 40 years, and that he kept limited hours 3 mornings a week in a small office he had maintained through his retirement. His receptionist answered on the second ring. I gave her my name and said I was the daughter of a longtime client. She asked whether I had an appointment. I said I didn't, but that my father had left documentation suggesting he may have made arrangements for a call like this one. She put me on hold. When she returned, she said Mr. Mercer could see me that afternoon. I drove with the wax paper packet in my bag. Colin met me in a small conference room. A quiet, deliberate man who moved as though he had spent decades learning that patience accomplishes more than speed, and that careful listening is the most productive form of preparation. I told him my full name. He was still for exactly 1 second. Then he said, "Your father expected I might hear from you." That sentence moved through me like something physical. I placed the notarized memorandum on the table between us. He read it without touching it. Then he nodded once. He told me my father had come to see him 2 years before his death. My father had grown concerned that Vera was managing the information around their mother's care in ways designed to shape how others understood my involvement. He hadn't wanted to amend the will publicly, because open family conflict while he was still living was something he had hoped to avoid. Instead, he had built a contingency, a supplemental estate instruction tied to my documented contributions and to specific conditions governing executor conduct. Colin looked at me across the table. Those conditions, he said carefully, might already have been violated. Colin asked questions in the careful sequence of a man who has spent 4 decades taking information and organizing it into something that can carry weight. He asked whether Vera had handled the final year of our mother's formal paperwork and outside correspondence. I said yes. He asked whether our mother had been experiencing increasing memory difficulty during that period. I said yes again and described the weeks where she had lost track of days, repeated questions within the same conversation, and occasionally looked at me for a brief moment with a blankness that passed before I could name it. Then he asked whether Vera had ever been granted broad authority over communications, whether she had become the person through whom outside information was filtered before reaching our mother or me. My stomach tightened in the specific way it does when you recognize a mistake you made a long time ago and only now understand what it cost. 10 months before my father died, Vera had come to a family dinner and said our mother was getting overwhelmed by the volume of incoming calls and mail. She suggested one daughter should manage the filtering. She framed it as protection. I had agreed because the week had been long, and the proposal sounded reasonable, and I was tired in the deep and specific way that sustained caregiving makes a person tired. Colin leaned back. He explained the structure my father had built. The supplemental instruction was designed to activate under 3 conditions. If Vera used undue influence over our mother's decisions, if she suppressed material information from other beneficiaries, or if she misrepresented my financial involvement in parental care to alter how the estate distribution was understood. The structure was there, Colin said. My father had trusted contingencies over confrontation. The problem was not identifying what had happened. The problem, he said, was proving it. I drove home thinking about proof. Proof is not the same thing as truth. Truth is what actually happened, which I understood clearly. Proof is what you can demonstrate specifically and verifiably, in a way that holds together under pressure when someone with authority is looking at it carefully. My father had understood this distinction. It was why he had built a contingency, rather than just a revised will. The contingency could activate, but only if the right evidence existed to support it. I had the bank records and the receipts from the wax paper packet. That was a foundation. The consulting firm emails I had seen in the folder were a different kind of evidence. More direct, more damaging. But I had encountered them through a drawer I had opened by accident, which was not the same as obtaining them through a proper channel. If I could get them through a legitimate process, they would be far more useful. I started thinking about other places documentation might exist that Vera did not know I knew about. Then I remembered something she had mentioned casually at least 2 years earlier. She had said the printer at our parents' house was unreliable, and she was connecting it through her own cloud account. That way, anything printed there would save automatically to her system, and she could access files remotely. I had registered it as a practical arrangement, and thought nothing more of it. Now I sat in my driveway and thought about what kinds of documents might have been printed through that cloud account over the past year, about whether any of them were connected to the consulting firm correspondence, the false summary, the story about me that Vera had been quietly constructing and filing for 8 months. That thought settled into me with the weight of something that matters. 2 days after meeting with Colin, I drove to Vera's house to visit my mother. Mom had been living in the downstairs guest suite since shortly after the funeral. Temporarily, as Vera described it, but I had been in that room 2 weeks before the funeral and seen that it was already set up, already arranged with the specific things my mother needed within easy reach, the chair already positioned at the exact angle she preferred. Weeks of preparation, at minimum. The temporary description was more social convenience than accurate. The home health aide let me in. Mom was at the small table by the window finishing a bowl of soup. She looked up when I came in, and her face opened the way it does when she sees someone she loves, and the tight thing that had been in my chest since the morning of the folder loosened a little. We sat together for nearly an hour. I helped her with her cardigan when the room got cool. She told me a story I had heard before about a neighbor from 40 years ago, and I listened to it the same way I listen every time, because the telling matters more than the novelty. Then she turned to me and asked why I had stopped coming around last winter. I kept very still. I had not stopped. I had been to that house most weeks through the winter, sometimes twice. I had been at that kitchen table sorting a medication schedule in February. I had been in the driveway in March, helping my father to the car. I asked quietly who had told her I had been staying away. She said Vera had mentioned it. Gently, she said, like she was protecting everyone's feelings. The story was not contained in a folder or in emails to an outside organization. It had been fed directly into my mother's memory of her own family. I was almost at my car when the aide came out after me. She crossed the driveway with purpose, like someone who had already decided this was worth doing before she came out the door. She introduced herself and said she hoped she wasn't overstepping. She asked if I was Paula. When I said yes, something moved across her face. She said she had been wondering because she had been told I lived out of state and was rarely involved. I am 40 minutes from that house. I have been 40 minutes away for 12 years. I looked at her and said so. She nodded the way someone nods when a suspicion they have been sitting with is confirmed. Then she told me about the log. Vera had asked her to maintain a daily care record. Who visited, how long they stayed, the emotional tone of the visit, how their mother responded. She had been told this was for legal purposes. That phrase used specifically. She had been asked to note any patterns of family absence or disengagement. Legal purposes. I stood in the driveway and understood what was in front of me, and I was grateful for the cold air because it gave me something to steady my breathing against before I said anything. Vera was not building a record of our mother's medical condition. She was building a time-stamped official record of my supposed absence, maintained by a professional caregiver, formatted as a care document that would support the version of me she had been reporting to the consulting firm for 8 months. She had not just been telling a story. She had been building the infrastructure to hold it up. I gave the aide my phone number. I thanked her in a way I hope communicated what her decision to come after me had actually meant. Then I drove home, and I changed the way I was thinking about everything. Up until the driveway conversation, I had still been operating as a daughter in pain. Hurt is a real thing. There is nothing false about discovering that a person who shares your history and your parents and your whole childhood spent months building a legal structure to reduce you to nothing. That pain belongs to you. It does not need to be minimized. But hurt has limits as a working posture. Hurt is emotional, and emotional thinking cannot see clearly around corners. It reaches for fairness. It wants to be heard. It keeps expecting the situation to correct itself, the way it would in a story about people who are at their best. A case does not work that way. A case works through chronology and documentation and specific independent witnesses. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table with a legal pad and started building one. I began with the financial timeline, not my feelings about it, but the facts. The dates, the amounts, the accounts, the property tax payment and what it had been responding to. The furnace job, and what the alternative would have been without it. Each transfer in order, with the source document I could attach to each entry. Then a second list. Every visit I could confirm through phone records, emails to my parents, or receipts from businesses near the house. Every appointment I had attended that would appear on a medical calendar. Every route I had driven that left any trace. Then a third list. Every time Vera had positioned herself as the person between me and information I should have had directly. Every instance of "I'll handle it" or "Don't worry, Mom," with the details. Every agreement I had made without understanding what I was agreeing to. Hurt is emotional. Cases are structural. I worked until past midnight and started again the next morning. I called the consulting firm the following week. I had the name from the email headers I had read in the folder. A firm in the city that described itself as offering family transition advisory and elder care coordination services, the kind of organization that presents itself as a neutral professional resource, and in practice operates on whatever information the initiating party chooses to provide. I introduced myself by full name and explained I was the daughter of a recently deceased client. I said I had reason to believe that information submitted to the firm about my family contained material inaccuracies, and that I wanted to formally request copies of any records or assessments in which my name appeared, because false statements about me appeared to have been submitted without my knowledge, by a third party. There was a pause on the line. Then the receptionist transferred me to compliance without explanation, which told me the word "false" had moved my call past the level of routine inquiry. The compliance contact was measured and professional. She explained the process and said I would need a formal written request. I said I would send it today. She said the turnaround would take time. I said I understood completely. I sent the certified letter within the hour and followed it immediately with the same language by email, both methods, so there would be no question about whether or when the request had arrived. Then I returned to my legal pad. I had been a bookkeeper long enough to understand the core problem clearly. The distance between what happened and what can be proven in a formal setting is almost always a documentation problem. Every piece of undocumented truth eventually becomes memory against memory, and memory is the easiest thing to challenge when the stakes are high enough to make the effort worthwhile. I was not going to let this come down to memory. 3 days after calling the firm, I returned to Colin's office. He had used the time between our meetings well. He had gone back through his archived working files from the years he had counseled my father, the handwritten notes and internal memos he kept alongside formal documents as part of his standard practice. He had also reviewed the retained estate file in full. He had found something Vera could not have known about. Attorneys sometimes draft documents that exist outside the formal file set: sealed statements, archived client memos, contemporaneous notes prepared in anticipation of future questions. Colin was the kind of attorney who kept these records carefully and for the long term. He had been in practice for nearly 40 years in the same county, which meant his filing system held histories other attorneys would have cleared out long ago. Among his archived materials was a sealed written statement from my father, drafted during the same meeting that had produced the notarized memorandum in my wax paper packet. The statement was in my father's own words, witnessed and retained by Colin. It said plainly, if either of his daughters intentionally misrepresented the other's involvement in parental care or finances, specifically to alter the distribution of the estate, that daughter should be considered to have acted in bad faith. It specified further that in the event of a bad faith finding, the enhanced distribution to that daughter could be formally challenged, and the estate could be reopened under the terms of the supplemental instruction. Colin laid the document on the table. He said my father had not trusted that goodwill would keep the outcome fair. He had not trusted confrontation to correct it. He had trusted something built carefully, in advance, by someone who understood that contingencies outlast intentions. He had built one. He had left it with the right person. The question was whether I could give it what it needed to activate. The compliance packet arrived by mail 10 days after I sent my request. I told myself not to expect much. Compliance departments exist to protect organizations, and I was one person making a request about a private family matter from outside the firm's normal client relationship. I expected something carefully filtered, formal language acknowledging my request while revealing as little as possible. The packet was more than I had expected. It contained several assessment summaries Vera had submitted over a period of 8 months. Each described our family situation in professional language, the measured, clinical kind that converts personal accounts into something that looks like objective analysis conducted from outside the situation. There was a version of me in those pages, named and described with apparent professional authority, the way a person gets described when a trained organization has been given specific information and is converting it into the language of clinical observation. This version of Paula Whitmore was largely absent from her parents' daily lives. She had a complicated relationship with money. She was described as having already received significant informal financial support from her parents over the years, and had therefore already received more than her proportionate share of family resources. I read that sentence 3 times. The claim that my parents had financially supported me, rather than the reverse, was so precisely and completely backwards from the documented reality that I sat with the packet in my hands for a full minute without moving. Vera had not improvised a casual lie. She had submitted it professionally, in writing, to an outside organization, in a format designed to look like objective family assessment, sustained over 8 months. She had turned the lie into a system. And I had dated receipts for every single claim she had invented, each one showing exactly what had actually happened with that money. At the back of the compliance packet was a footnote referencing a supporting document. The cover letter mentioned it briefly. An additional submission provided by the referring party, referenced in the assessment summaries, not included in the copy sent to me. Colin requested it formally the same week, citing my status as the named subject of the referenced materials. It arrived at his office 4 days later. He called and said I should come in. I read it sitting across from him in the conference room while he watched my face and said nothing, which was the right thing for him to do. Some documents require the silence around them. It was a typed document, 3 pages, formatted as a family contribution summary. My name appeared in the header. It listed what it described as cash gifts and informal financial support my parents had provided to me over 10 years. Each entry had a date, a dollar amount, and a brief description of the supposed purpose. Every entry was false. I could see the structure immediately. Several of the dates matched transactions I recognized directly from my father's records. The date Vera listed as a personal cash gift to me was the same date I had paid the furnace invoice. The amount she listed as parental housing support was the exact amount I had paid to the county tax office. She had not invented the numbers. She had taken real, documented transactions from my father's accounts and changed what they were for. On paper, in a formatted document, submitted to a third party as though it were historical family financial record. She had manufactured a financial past for me designed specifically to justify a zero inheritance. The dates were real, the amounts were real, the purposes were entirely fabricated, and every single one of them had a receipt behind it with my name on it, and the real payee clearly listed. I needed to understand the full construction of it before I moved forward, because it was careful work. A person who invents amounts from nothing produces something that collapses the moment it touches a real record. Vera had not done that. She had used real dates from real transactions. The document had the texture of something grounded in genuine financial history, because it was grounded in genuine financial history, rearranged. I spread my father's account records alongside her false summary on my kitchen table and worked through them in parallel. The pattern became clear within 2 hours. Every entry she had listed as a gift to me was a withdrawal that had in reality gone to a specific payee, a licensed contractor, the county tax office, a pharmacy, a medical transport company. The dates and amounts matched documented transactions. The stated purposes had been swapped. The furnace repair deposit became informal support for my housing costs. The property tax payment became a personal cash gift. A pharmacy reimbursement became money my parents had sent me for personal expenses. She had not invented the skeleton. She had rearranged the bones and relabeled them. It was the kind of fraud that requires someone who knows the real record well enough to know which pieces to move. The result looked entirely plausible to anyone who did not have the full set of records in front of them. What she had not accounted for, what she could not have anticipated, because there was no reason for her to know, was that I had kept the paper behind every single transaction she had touched. Invoices, transfer confirmations, dated receipts with vendor names. The complete documentary record of what that money had actually done. Every false entry in her summary had a real document directly behind it, showing exactly where the money had gone. She had built her entire structure on a floor she believed had nothing beneath it. Vera called on a Wednesday and asked me to come over. She said she wanted to clear the air before the estate was finalized. Her tone was the careful and generous kind she uses when she believes she is managing a situation she already controls. She said it would be good for everyone to close this chapter without bad feeling between us. I agreed without hesitation, which was the correct response. If she was ready to meet, I needed to know what she thought she was handling. I drove to her house. She had coffee on the desk in the same office. She sat across from me with her hands folded and her face set into the expression she uses when she wants to project both authority and warmth simultaneously. She said she knew the will had been difficult for me to hear. She said she hoped I could understand that our father had simply been trying to do what was most practical for the family as a whole. Then she pushed a small envelope across the desk. She said she was offering me $10,000 from her own share as a peace gesture, because she wanted to move forward without bad feeling between sisters. All she needed in return was my signature on a brief family settlement agreement, confirming that the will accurately reflected our father's true wishes. I looked at the envelope. $10,000, in exchange for a signed legal statement that everything had been fair and accurate and complete. Guilty people do not offer hush money when they feel secure. They offer it when they have sensed something has shifted, and they are trying to close a door before it opens all the way. I told her I needed a few days to think it over and thanked her for the offer. Then I drove away from her house with the same calm face I had been wearing for weeks. I let her talk during that meeting without arguing against anything she said. She filled the space the way she does when she believes she has the upper hand. Generously, with the ease of someone who thinks the other person is working from incomplete information. She said our father had always worried about daughters who struggled to build stable lives. She said she understood that losing Wayne had been hard, and that grief sometimes causes people to see unfairness where there is only circumstance. She said she had carried more of the real burden of caring for their parents than anyone outside the family had ever fully understood or appreciated. I nodded in the appropriate places. I asked a small question now and then to keep her moving. Then she said the thing she did not mean to say quite as directly as it came out. She said, "You know, paperwork only matters if someone knows how to frame it." She said it easily, leaning back slightly, with the manner of someone stating something so obviously true that it barely needs saying. I kept my face completely still. I said, I suppose that was probably right, and that I appreciated her time, and that I would be in touch within a few days. I drove 2 blocks and pulled into a pharmacy parking lot. I took out my notebook and wrote her exact words before they could soften in my memory. Every word in sequence, the date at the top of the page, the approximate time. It was not a confession in the legal sense. It was better suited to what I needed. It was character, spoken in her own voice, in her own office, in a room where she had believed the balance of knowledge was entirely on her side. I put the notebook in my bag and drove home. Colin filed the motion to reopen the estate the following week. The filing was constructed on 4 independent pillars, each substantial on its own, and collectively difficult to argue against from any direction. The first was the false family contribution summary, a document Vera had submitted in writing, under her own name, to a third-party professional organization that directly contradicted the verified financial records in my possession. Every false entry was paired in the filing with the real invoice or receipt behind it. The second was the care log and the aide's testimony, including her written account of being told I lived out of state, a claim that was straightforwardly and documentably false, and that had been used to shape an official ongoing record of my supposed absence from my own parents' lives. The third was the consulting firm correspondence itself. 8 months of assessment submissions describing me in clinical language that the full documentary record directly disproved, submitted by a person with an undisclosed financial stake in the distribution outcome. The fourth was my father's sealed contingent statement, confirmed by Colin and supported by his own contemporaneous archived notes, specifying in plain language what bad faith conduct would mean for the estate and what remedy had been built to respond to it. The motion also requested that final distribution be suspended pending review, and that Vera's authority over our mother's care arrangements be placed under independent oversight during the process. For nearly a year, Vera had been building a smooth and well-maintained road toward a specific destination. Now there were court deadlines, formal document requests she could not redirect through a family filter, a judge who was going to read the actual record instead of the version submitted to a consulting firm. The woman who had said paperwork only matters if someone knows how to frame it was about to encounter someone who had the receipts. The hearing was not like the scenes people imagine when they picture a legal process reaching its conclusion. No gallery, no raised voices, no dramatic turn in the final moments. Just a room with organized binders, 2 attorneys, and a judge who had clearly read the full record before she arrived and came in with specific questions already formed. Colin walked through the financial timeline without hurrying. Each of my contributions laid out in order, dated, verified, cross-referenced against my father's account records and the original invoices behind every transaction. Each entry in Vera's false summary placed directly beside the actual transaction it had been drawn from, with the real payee and real purpose shown clearly alongside the false one she had assigned. The consulting firm correspondence, laid out chronologically. The care log. The aide's written statement and her account of what she had been told about my location and involvement. My father's sealed contingent statement, in his own words, confirmed by the attorney who had witnessed it. Vera's defense reached for emotion. She cried. She said she had given more than anyone recognized to the care of their parents in those final years. She said she was only trying to protect their mother from the instability that grief can create. Then the judge asked one question. She asked why the family contributions summary listed Paula Whitmore as having received personal cash gifts on specific dates when the corresponding withdrawals from her parents' accounts were attached to verified vendor invoices for property repairs, tax payments, and medical expenses. Vera looked at the table in front of her. She began an answer about informal family financial understandings that were difficult to document precisely. The judge did not continue pressing. She did not need to. The story Vera had built could not hold its own weight against the actual record. I watched her lose the room, not through argument or revelation, but through the quiet and thorough collapse of a structure that had been built on a floor it turned out was not there. The court found sufficient evidence of bad faith misrepresentation to reopen the estate distribution entirely. The false contribution summary was treated as a material distortion of the record. My father's supplemental contingent instruction was formally activated. The distribution was recalculated to reflect the equitable offset tied to my documented contributions. The property taxes, the furnace, the roof deposit, the prescriptions, the medical transport fees, the accumulated years of financial support I had covered because someone had to, and I was the one who showed up. Vera's enhanced authority over the estate was removed. Her management of our mother's care arrangements was placed under independent oversight while the broader situation was reviewed. The inheritance reduced to 0 was restored, substantially. There was one line in the final court order that I have returned to more than once since the day I received it. It said that Vera's conduct had directly undermined the reliability of the original distribution narrative. That word again. Narrative. She had written it on a yellow legal pad in 2 careful columns of strategy. She had told the consulting firm the narrative needed to hold. She had said in her own office, in her own voice, that paperwork only matters if someone knows how to frame it. The court found that what she had framed was fabricated. Everything she had built to make me disappear from the record collapsed under the weight of the actual record. I walked out of the courthouse with my father's watch on my wrist. The amended estate order was in my bag alongside the notebook where I had written everything down, dated and in order, the way a bookkeeper keeps records when she understands that the truth about any situation lives in the numbers if you're patient enough to look. He had been right about that. He had been right about me too. I had known where to look. If this story hit you somewhere deep, if you've ever been underestimated by the people who were supposed to protect you, or if you know what it feels like to have your voice taken away by someone who smiled while they did it, then you already know why Brooke's story matters. This is the kind of story we tell here. Real stakes, real consequences, real people who refuse to fold. Subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss the next one. Because the stories coming are even more powerful than this one, and you don't want to be the last person to hear them. And before you go, drop a comment and tell me, where are you watching from? And what part of Brooke's story hit you the hardest? Share this with someone who needs to hear that staying quiet can be the most powerful move you make, and that the truth always finds its way to the surface, no matter how deep someone tries to bury it. We'll see you in the next one.